Alright guys, Murph's here. And today, I want to talk about taking your next, or your, what's more important to say, first steps as a shooter in the shooting community. Who is this video aimed at? This video is aimed at somebody who just went to the range with a friend, spouse, family member, whoever, for the very first time and has decided, you know what? This shooting thing's pretty cool. They maybe already had some interest. Perhaps they were starting to become aware of the fact that they can be an active participant in their own self-defense, and they wanted to pursue firearms as a part of that instead of having to rely on like less than lethal means and all that kind of stuff. Because one of the big things about carrying a gun is that you don't necessarily have to use it, but if you're in a situation where you need it, you'd rather have it than wish that you did. So this is somebody who maybe went out on a range trip with the type of person that I outlined in my Introducing to New Shooters video, which if you're interested in that, go ahead and take a look at the link in the description. So now this person wants to do this. This is their new hobby. This is their new thing that they want to invest their time, energy, and money in. They want to develop their skill. They want to be that active participant in their own defense. And they're trying to figure out, well, where do I go now? This is mostly aimed at somebody who doesn't already have an immediate family member or spouse who has the range setup. So a lot of us who grew up shooting and stuff like that, we are actually kind of lucky because we already got to, go through the process of building our range bags and understand all the ins and outs of firearms and stuff like that, or at least a good bit about the ins and outs of firearms. We already have everything it is that we need. We had that as soon as we left the house type of deal, like I did. But if you're coming into this already as an adult and all that kind of stuff, and you don't have somebody immediately around you who shoots, or perhaps you and your spouse have decided that this is an activity you want to launch into together, that you're starting out with together on, then you're going to need to figure out, what do I do now? I'm interested in guns. I'm interested in shooting. How do I get started? Okay, well, the first and most obvious discussion that we have to have is the firearm. However, while the firearm is very important in this case, the firearm is not the only thing that we need to talk about. And really, this may be a little bit of a controversial opinion. The firearm is probably the last thing we need here. Let me explain that a little bit further here. Because this is a gun channel, and I incorporate firearms in like all things in my life. What do I mean the gun is like the last thing we need? What I want to encourage you to do is to take your time in selecting that first handgun. Now, altruism here is going to be that your first gun is not going to be your last gun, most likely. In fact, you're going to hopefully buy more guns, or at the very least, you're going to upgrade the one that you have. What I want you to get here is I don't want you to wind up regretting your first purchase. A lot of people in the firearms community regret their first gun. Many of us wound up selling our first guns in order to be able to fund better options. Firearms are not an insignificant cash investment. And having to redo it after the gun is depreciated in your use and all that kind of stuff, it'll really hurt. And this is already a pretty expensive hobby to get into, let alone with making quote unquote mistakes. You're going to outgrow your first gun, and that's okay. The question is your first gun still going to be relevant in your life, or did you pick something that wound up being too spicy? It didn't fit your hands properly. It didn't have any of the features that you suddenly decided are very important to you. As you develop skill as a shooter, you're going to wind up preferencing new things. You're going to realize that you want your grips perhaps more textured, or you really prefer lighter triggers, you prefer a certain sight arrangement, on and on and on. Capacities, cartridges, all those types of things. There are going to be different trends, there are going to be different interests that you're going to develop over time. There's going to be different things that you evaluate as being helpful to you. What I really want you to do is to make a good decision, the best decision based off of available information. Now, in this case, what type of firearm should a brand new shooter be looking at? You don't own any guns yet. In my opinion, a handgun. And this might be surprising to some because a consistent opinion for me on this channel is that handguns are terrible fight stoppers. However, it's the convenience factor of a handgun that makes me preference it for a new shooter. This way you have something that you can conceal carry and use for home defense until you decide to get better options for home defense specifically. Now, another question might be cost. How much should I spend on my first gun? That is a very subjective thing, and I'm not going to tell you an amount. I have my kind of minimum level that I expect to pay for a good quality brand new defensive firearm. And it pretty much precludes manufacturers like Taurus and anything kind of below that. And like a lot of Ruger's product line, I've become less and less interested in and stuff like that over the years, especially since their styling is looking more and more like Taurus. Might be an unpopular opinion, but that's the reality of this. However, that's my preference, and I'm not here to make my preference your problem. Whatever your budget is and however much time you can allocate to looking for guns is an extremely subjective thing. I'm not on this vein of like, well, buy once, cry once, and all that kind of stuff. Some people can't afford that. If you're in a situation where you have identified that you want to defend yourself with a firearm, you are now comfortable enough with guns to be able to start getting into that interest, but you are concerned for your life in the near term. Some circumstance has made you aware of the fact that you could potentially be in danger, or in general, you're placing you and your family's livelihood and I guess livelihood wouldn't be the right word in this case. You and your family's safety above all else, but you ain't got a whole lot of money, but you need to move fast. If that means you have to buy a used High Point, okay, that's fine. I get it. I hope at some point in the future you'll upgrade that gun. It's just unfortunate that you have to start out that way. Pure preference thing. I get it. I understand it. I'm not trying to come from a position of privilege to tell you that you have to do X, Y, Z. But I encourage you to get the best thing that you can afford and to take the most amount of time you can selecting that. So how do we get into this process? Because as it turns out, there's a ton of options out of the market we do not want for firearms options in any genre, which is great. That makes it a consumer's market for sure, though prices don't necessarily reflect that at the moment. That's a finicky thing that you can't necessarily depend on. And with those wide variety of options out there on the market, you also have a ton of opinions, but not all opinions have equal weight. And this is a very key aspect of this. Your grandpa might tell you as a, perhaps a female getting involved in the situation, well, you just need a 38 snub nose. And your dad might tell you, well, a 380, a little like pocket 380 would probably be a pretty good option for you. And those guns have pros and cons that are associated with them for sure, but they are not necessarily one size fits all options or answers. And a lot of people, especially of a certain age group or orientation, will try to paint them in that way. And I'm not a big fan of that because the conversation is much more nuanced and contextual than that. And on this channel, we deal in nuance and context. So let's go ahead and get into this process of researching your first gun. If you have friends that have a bunch of handguns, absolutely borrow them. Get out there, shoot those guns, try them out. Ask your friends what they would have done differently on this particular purchase or things that they feel like could have been done better in the overall firearm design, or how it is that they employ the gun. What holsters are they carrying that makes it helpful for them? What type of situation or circumstance do they feel that the niche that it fills in their collection? But also keep in mind, your friends bought those guns, so they probably like them. And when people invest money into firearms, they have a tendency to defend the purchases and try to recommend them that way. That's their preference. It's okay to take their advice. It's okay to input that information and put it into your overall decision matrix and all that kind of stuff, but do not take them at that word. I urge you to research it more thoroughly for yourself. Oh, that's very sweet. I like that. I like that quite a bit. A little citrusy. I'm going to need more of that. So, borrow guns from your friends. Absolutely. Go to your gun shop and handle a bunch of different guns and stuff like that and look at all these different options. But keep in mind, the people behind the counter are salesmen. And I trust salesmen as far as I can throw them. One of the other big things about people behind the counter is they have a tendency to recommend in trends. So say like right now, the SIG P365, very popular defensive handgun. I don't think there's anything wrong with the SIG P365. I want to go ahead and identify that right off the bat. However, depending on what it is that you want to get out of that particular handgun, The 365 is not a one-size-fits-all solution like some people might make it out to be, especially when you look at like the macro and stuff like that, which has 15-round capacity. So yes, you have, the same capacity as a Walther PPQ or a Beretta or something along those lines, but it's not a big gun. And some people might say that like, oh, well, Glock 26 is really great because it, performs like a big gun but carries like a small gun. And as somebody who owns, shoots, and has competed with the Glock 26, I can tell you that, and has made that sentiment before, has made that statement, I can tell you that it does not. There are drawbacks. This is a conscious trade-off, especially when we're talking about trying to use a gun as both home defense and self-defense. Those things, depending on your body and your needs and all that kind of stuff, don't necessarily cross that well. And for more on like what makes a good bedside table and recommendations for concealed carry guns, those are two separate videos that I'll put the links to in the description. Though I will warn you right off the bat, those were much older videos, so I do have a tendency to drag on, which, is also true for new videos. Who knew? Anyway, so with that being the case, go to gun shops, handle guns, take every bit of information there you get with a grain of salt, because ultimately they're just trying to sell you something. And there's nothing against that. I respect the grind and all that kind of stuff. But that does not mean that you two are of the same goal. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. So as you start to pare down all these options that are out there in the market, you've handled different things, you shot some of your friends' guns, which may or may not be comprehensive collections. You may not have very many friends that you can shoot with. Then go to indoor ranges or even outdoor ranges, whatever range that rents guns, and shoot a bunch of guns. Hopefully they have options that are on your pared down list, but if a friend of yours threw out an option and, well, this gun's not exactly like it, but the grip is pretty similar, the grip texturing is pretty similar, I'm going to try that out and see how it is that it goes for me, and all that kind of stuff. Use that to help pare down your list even further. Now, of course, whenever it is that you go to gun shops or gun shows or any of these types of places, there's going to be a ton of people offering you opinions, and I would like to remind you that not all opinions hold equal weight. I've heard a lot of really terrible opinions pretty much everywhere I go in the firearms community. Outdated stuff that's not based in like science, physics, reality, none of the above. So be careful. Another option for you to look into, especially if you can't necessarily borrow a whole bunch of guns, is YouTube. However, my issue with YouTube is not even necessarily that you still have some of those like really negative or bad opinions or outdated opinions and stuff like that. There's also a lot of just really cookie cutter reviews. People pretty much saying the same stuff over and over again about the same guns with no real difference in opinion. They repeat industry talking points, the actual manufacturers like data pretty much, and what it is that's supposed to be the selling point of these firearms and all that kind of stuff, and popular trendy opinions. That's really annoying. I urge you, even if it's not my channel, to pick channels that do have contextual conversation, that are willing to say negative things about a gun, because just like in print media, on YouTube you'll find an awful lot of reviewers that have never shot a gun they didn't like. Everything has good, and they don't necessarily dwell on the negatives of a particular firearm. And that's one of the things that I hate about YouTube. And I try really hard to make sure that my channel doesn't dwell on that type of thing. Ultimately, the firearm is your choice. Nobody else has to deal with your choice but you. Spend your money wisely as best you can with the information that you have available. Now, when it comes into hammer fired versus striker fired versus revolvers versus 1911s versus whatever type of guns that you want to talk about, let alone what cartridges that they're chambered in, those are your choices. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. But what I will tell you when it comes to ammunition is keep an eye out for cost and availability, because you might have the coolest whiz-bang cartridge out there, but if you can't supply enough of it to be able to train, you will not develop your skill. In addition to that, for the most part, with a couple of notable exceptions, all handgun cartridges are terrible fight stoppers. So in my opinion, it doesn't really matter what you choose. What matters is whether or not you can supply yourself enough to be able to consistently train. That is the bottom line, in my opinion. You can buy a lot more 9mm than you can 10mm. Same amount of ammunition, you'll buy more 9mm for that money. That's something to consider. Yes, the 10 millimeter can be a potent cartridge, which is a discussion for another time. Actually covered in my 10 millimeter cartridge discussion video if you're interested in that. But if you peruse the channel a little bit, I have a lot of cartridge discussion videos that can help you determine what it is that your choice should be for that. But when you talk about cost, when you talk about availability, capacity, any perceived notion that that whatever cartridge has a better performance than another, all that type of stuff, that is the conscious trade-off that you have to evaluate to figure out what is going to work for you, and you're the only person who can determine that. A lot of decisions that have to be made here. While you're making these decisions, there's a lot of other stuff that you can invest into to start cutting some of the costs of getting into the firearms community and maintaining in the firearms community. So you're going on these ranges and stuff like that, and you're having to buy ammunition to be able to test out these guns, be it from your friends or from the range itself. And then, you've got to get eye protection, ear protection, targets every time you go in there. These things mount up. First off with ammunition, if you're renting guns, a lot of ranges will tell you that you have to buy their ammunition with their rented guns. They might even tell you have to buy their ammunition in order to be able to shoot there. If you have to buy their ammo to shoot there, I wouldn't shoot at that range. But I also belong to a gun club, and I have always, and everywhere I've lived, I've had access to a range that didn't necessarily have that situation going on. That may not be the case everywhere, but I would encourage you to find one that does not make you buy their ammo, because you're probably buying it at an inflated cost. We want to avoid that as best we can. If a range requires that for rental, that might be a cost that you just have to eat in order to be able to assess that gun and assess the options that are out there. It's unfortunate, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. But if you can stockpile ammunition off to the side, buy it at better prices and stuff like that, that is a way to cut down some of these costs, because ammunition costs are never going away once you get into the Second Amendment community. In addition to that, buying your own eye protection. I would encourage you to always make sure to have a pair of clear lens eye pro available to you, because if you go from shooting indoors to shooting outdoors, you're going to be very weather dependent on whether or not you actually need dark eye pro. And it's better, in my opinion, to make sure that you always have clear eye pro with you. Even in my day job, if I'm doing something that requires eye protection, I will default to clear eye protection. Because if I'm going from outdoors to indoors, I don't want to be sitting there playing musical glasses. And I don't want to run into a situation where I try to push dark lenses into a dark space and just work through it. So I will default to clear lenses immediately in those types of circumstances. And I encourage everyone to do so for those types of purposes. Now, for my own private range sessions and stuff like that, if it's bright outside, I'm going to wear shaded lenses, because I'm not transitioning from outdoors to indoors and vice versa. That's a difference between my professional and personal life in that case. In addition to that, ear protection. And I would encourage you to invest in ear protection. Foamy ear protection only gets you so far. I prefer noise canceling, and I actually have multiple sets and different types of noise canceling hearing protection. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on hearing protection. This is not going to be the main focus of our discussion, other than to say that I prefer in-ear options. These are from Peltor. They fit inside of my ears. It's not dependent on what type of glasses that I wear, whether or not I'm going to wind up breaking the seal on over-ear hearing protection and stuff like that. If you're going to go with over-the-ear hearing protection, make sure that you get nice, thin designed glasses, so that first off, they're not pressing into your temples as bad as something that's going to be super thick. And in addition to that, as you turn your head and look around and stuff like that, you don't run the risk of breaking the seal on your ear pro and getting, the full report of that handgun in your ear. You're going to want to avoid that as best you can. That's why I prefer to go with in-ear protection. Now, some people don't like in-ear protection. They find it uncomfortable and stuff like that. I have hearing aids. I live with things shoved in my ears, so it doesn't really bother me that much. So even professionally, I run in-ear hearing protection. Electronic in-ear hearing protection. I do have over-ear hearing protection that I keep in my truck. I have two sets. I have Peltors, and I have some Walkers, and those are my loaner sets. Or if for whatever reason these die, or I forget them because I took them out for cleaning or something like that, I have ear protection that's always available to me. And those sets are just fine. They do exactly what it is that they're supposed to do, as long as you take certain things into account. And that is why I have thin frames available to me at all times. Targets. Ranges will give you targets. Generally, they're going to be a little bit more costly than if you just went out and bought them yourself. So go ahead, have some targets available to you that you've already put together. You got them ready to go. You don't have to get targets from the range. And targets are just going to be an ever-present thing. You're going to need targets. Just go ahead and stockpile them. Now, cleaning kit. As a part of firearm maintenance, you're of course going to need a cleaning kit. But there's one thing that I would recommend with a cleaning kit, and I have multiple cleaning kits, many cleaning kits. But one thing that I preference for the cleaning kit that I keep with me whenever it is that I go to the range, there we go, it lets go of it. I have a multi-piece rigid cleaning rod. Why do I have a rigid cleaning rod? See here, it's segmented. Because sometimes you wind up with stuck cartridge casings that the only way to be able to get them out is to be able to insert something in the barrel to be able to punch that cartridge casing out. It happens. And it can especially happen with range guns because those are high round count firearms. They likely are needing some maintenance of some sort, or perhaps they're still dirty. Who knows how many times it's been rented and how much it's been shot just that day, let alone in the last year. So I would highly encourage that you have some type of rigid cleaning rod available to you so that you can get a gun back up to full use. Now, what are we going to put all this stuff into, Murph? Well, it's very important to have a range bag. This is my ammo bag, which I also like throw my magazines into. If I don't feel like carrying guns in cases for whatever reason, I'll throw them in here. And this is actually still loaded up from the competition that I shot just earlier today. This is a pretty decent bag, though to fit targets in it, it's a little small. But I have magazines, like I have some AR-15 magazines that are always on here. I have snacks that are thrown in here to make sure that I have food whenever it is that I'm at the range for an extended period of time. I'm at a course or a competition or something along those lines. So this is an option. But what I actually use for all of my range stuff is a larger backpack like this one. Now, this setup is something that I actually used professionally for a little bit. This setup is great because I go to a lot of outdoor ranges. I need to be able to walk from my truck to whatever bay it is that I'm shooting at and all that kind of stuff. This is very advantageous to me for that type of purpose, especially going to courses and stuff like that. I have all of my gear that I could possibly need. I have targets, I have a timer, I have my rangefinder and all that kind of stuff. You starting out don't need all those things. You may not even need a bag this size, but the great thing about going with a slightly larger bag is that you have room to grow. So that when you decide, hey, I actually, a timer would really benefit me for being able to like figure out how fast I'm shooting and where like my throttle's at and all that kind of stuff, and help me be able to identify how to adjust my throttle. Yeah, a timer is really great for that type of thing. That's something that you can get into later once you progress your skills to the point of wanting to start figuring out what a throttle looks like. In the meanwhile, this is a really convenient place to be able to store all this kind of stuff. Now, I'm not telling you that you have to have some sort of big tactical backpack or anything along those lines. You just need a rigid enough bag that it'll last for a little while. So for years, I used a Winchester range bag, real small range bag, actually not too different in size from this one. And finally, one of the pockets blew out and I upgraded. And I feel pretty good about my upgrade. Now, this is not a comprehensive review of what it is that I carry to the range. These are what you, in my opinion, need in order to get started at the range. And that's a really big distinction there. One thing that might help out your fingers long term is I have to dig around for mine here for a second. The Uplula mag loader. Now guys, I don't use this. I've never found this to be terribly helpful to me. I have no real issue with being able to jam ammunition into magazines. Like it's never really been a consideration for me. I load up magazines, no real problem. For some people, it is a big issue, especially if you're talking about people who maybe don't have a lot of strength in their hands. So I would consider that to be a very necessary tool in your range bag. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting. And, well, if you're a new shooter watching this video, And, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope that this was something that is going to allow you to be able to figure out what your next step is, what your next move is, and all that kind of stuff, so that you can indulge in this community and in this pastime. All right, guys. I think that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.